Those chords are the opening sounds of our concert. The first, the Metropolitan Wind Symphony, will play in over a year and a half as the ensemble resumes public performances once again. Welcome to this video preview from the Podium. My name is Eric Melley, and it is my privilege and honor to work with this ensemble in their first concert back in action. When I was selecting music for the concert, we were in the midst of closures and lockdowns. Since we couldn't do much of anything else, I spent as much time outdoors with my family as possible. Kayaking and hiking are two of my favorite hobbies. You might notice a through line of music that depicts the outdoors or perhaps far-off places. I think most of us just wanted to get away. This brings us to our first selection on the program, which is from the 1991 film Grand Canyon. James Newton Howard composed the eponymous fanfare, and he began his work in the entertainment industry as a session musician, working with groups like Toto, a New England-based group, and then he moved on to movie scores. He's won or been nominated for the highest awards in the industry and has composed music for the films The Dark Knight and The Fugitive, and has a number of collaborations with the director M. Night Shyamalan. The film has a stellar cast, including Steve Martin, Danny Glover, Kevin Kline, and Alfre Woodard, though it seems to be largely forgotten. It culminates in the final scene wherein the characters, up to this point, all in disparate storylines, all arrive at the Grand Canyon together. This is where we hear those first chords. It begins in E-flat minor. And then Howard uses a device that's very common in minor keys, going all the way back to Henry Purcell. It's called a ground bass. What it means is you have revolving chords over a descending bass line. We start here. Right? So we start in E-flat minor. And here we expect to hear another E-flat minor chord. But that's not what Howard gives us. And this is what evokes this awesome power of the Grand Canyon, the color, this little twist, this little surprise. He gives us this. And then it continues down. Returning to a minor key, we get a nice dissonant crunch. And then it finally settles in E-flat major, settling us in a major key overall. The rest of the fanfare is no less powerful. It continues with some amazing flourishes in the upper brass and some thrilling lines in the woodwind as well. From the Grand Canyon, we go to the mythical realm of Illyria, the fictitious locale of Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. Guy Wolfenden was, for nearly 4 decades, the music director for the Royal Shakespeare Company, and much of his concert music is derivative of incidental music he wrote for those productions. Indeed, while his music is modern, it has a great deal of influence from Elizabethan style. We call them parallelisms or modal harmony. It might sound a little bit like Gregorian chant. He does this all while being very tuneful and danceable. Wolfenden has written a number of works for band and notably composed for this ensemble. His French impressions were commissioned by the MetWinds, and it was the first commission by an American ensemble. It is dedicated to 2 long-standing board members of the MetWinds, Esther and Bob Piankian. You'll hear Esther playing the bass trombone on this concert. Twelfth Night is the last night of Christmas revelries, when social custom and rules were suspended. If it helps to get an idea of that context, it is also the official start of the Mardi Gras season. Illyrian Dances is set in 3 movements and captures the festive spirit of the celebrations. The common dance form rondo starts us off. The rondo form comprises an idea that repeats throughout, separated by contrasting ideas. In the A theme, we can hear those hallmarks of Wolfenden's style. When it is set over that modal harmony, we hear this. Since the music is so repetitive, it's up to the composer to set the melody in inventive ways, a variety that Wolfenden provides in abundance. The second movement is entitled Obad, which is a song of the morning. You can almost see the characters waking up, getting out of bed, and stretching as the movement begins with this beautiful melody set in Dorian mode. Partway through the movement, you'll hear some beautiful solo work in our woodwind sections, much of it imitative of birdsong. To close out the piece, Wolfenden gives us a jig, or a jig, which is a fast dance, usually in 3. This movement is also in rondo form, so be sure to listen for those repeated sections. During the first several months of the pandemic, so many of us were isolated from one another and experiencing grief from the loss of loved ones or the lack of connection with our family, friends, and neighbors. Or maybe we were dealing with challenges to our livelihood or employment, or struggling with civic strife surrounding politics or racism. In years past, making music together, singing and playing, has been a source of solace when we've been confronted with great loss and tragedy. This is something the pandemic temporarily deprived us of, and so I felt obliged to acknowledge those losses in our program. Spread throughout the program are 3 works, a trilogy of loss, so to speak. The first of these is Allerseelen, or All Souls Day, by Richard Strauss. Strauss wrote the piece for voice and piano when he was just 21. Our setting, by Albert Davis, is much more an arrangement than a transcription. Taking a descending arpeggio from the piano accompaniment, he expands it and develops a whole introduction and development section. It happens right at the beginning of the piano accompaniment in Strauss's original. But Davis turns it into something much more solemn, an extended introduction based on the motive. The text is poignant, written by Herman von Gillen. It's written from the perspective of one who has lost a loved one. The last stanza sums up the sentiment of the work and its meaning on All Souls Day. Each grave today has flowers and is fragrant. One day each year is devoted to the dead. Come to my heart, and so be mine again, as once in May. The next piece, Instinctive Travels by Michael Markowski, is a wild ride. He brings the listener on a rhythmic, adrenaline-filled journey, putting a simple dance-like melody through its paces. Once again, we have a composer who's using mode mixture. We're not entirely sure what key we're in. It sounds a lot like D minor, but centers on D major as well. But what really creates confusion is that he's borrowing a lot from B flat, which would be a chord from D minor. Quoting the composer, he says, "There's something primal about rhythm that inspired a more animalistic and chaotic musical landscape." The piece culminates in a statement of the Anglican hymn, "All things bright and beautiful." Why this hymn? Markowski quotes Darwin by way of explanation. "There is a grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one. and that, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. Gustav Holst composed a Moorside Suite for brass band in 1928. It was the test piece for the British National Brass Band competition held at the Crystal Palace. The suite as a whole comprises 3 movements and concludes with a march. While Holst began setting the work for military band, he never completed the project, perhaps because he passed away in 1934. And the setting we're playing on Sunday was arranged by Gordon Jacob. Jacob, aside from being a fine composer himself, was professor of composition at the Royal College of Music in London. Among his many students, Imogen Holst, the composer's daughter. The march has 2 main themes, the first of which begins with a vaulting fanfare of stacked fourths, which goes immediately into an unusual 6-bar phrase. It sounds like something J.S. Bach might have written. The second theme is simply gorgeous. Holst had such a gift for hymn-like moments in his music, and this one stacks up there with similar moments one finds in Jupiter or his military band suites. Julie Giroux is an Emmy Award-winning composer who was born in Massachusetts, has spent time in Louisiana and Arizona, and currently lives in Mississippi. She dedicated this piece to Heather Kramer-Rue, who was the daughter of Mr. Ray Kramer, longtime director of bands at the University of Indiana, whose family commissioned this work in memory of their daughter. In the words of the composer, the meaning of One Life Beautiful has 2 facets. In one sense, it is referring to the person this work is dedicated to, as in one life that was beautifully lived. The other sense is a direct observation, concluding that having only one life is what makes life so sacred, tragic, and so very precious. This is an impressionistic work, musically describing that condition, Shakespeare's sweet sorrow, the frailty and strength of life, the meaning of what it is to truly live one life beautiful. In my opinion, there's just no one out there who orchestrates more beautifully for wind band than Julie Giroux, and very few who are even in her league. She describes the work as impressionistic with lots of elision and overlapping layers. I won't even try to represent it on the piano. You'll have to come to the concert. But a teaser for next spring, Ms. Giroux has been commissioned to write a symphony for MetWinds, and it will be premiered under the baton of conductor laureate Lou Buckley in the spring. The next piece on our program has us returning outdoors, and I couldn't help but think of the lighthouse as a metaphor for our existence during lockdowns. Isolated, watchfully waiting, but hopefully surrounded by some of nature's beauty. The Lighthouse by Joanne Harris is the composer's first work for wind band. Harris is a New York City-based composer who composes for multiple television shows, commercials, and multimedia performances. The Lighthouse isn't explicitly programmatic, but its post-minimal language has a cinematic quality to it. One can almost picture drone footage of the many lighthouses that dot New England's coastline and barrier islands. Our concert culminates with Omar Thomas's first work for wind band, Of Our New Day Begun. Of Our New Day Begun was written to honor the 9 victims of the shooting at the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina in June of 2015. Because of its subject matter, the musical materials take their inspiration from the music of the Black American church tradition. More specifically, the melodic material is drawn from James Weldon and J. Rosamond Johnson's anthem from 1900. Lift every voice and sing. This is powerful and hopeful music. At one point, the band breaks out in song, and the score's musical direction instructs us to sing fully despite our pain, to be hopeful in the face of tragedy. Weldon Johnson's lyrics are optimistic, calling us to sing until earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. We'll conclude our concert with, what else? A march. The Manhattan Beach was composed in the summer of 1893 and was written for the owner of the former summer resort in New York. This march has one of my favorite trios of all of Sousa's marches. It begins in B flat and then moves to E flat. The listener might expect it to return to B flat, but instead it moves from E flat deceptively to G minor, and then back and forth. Before returning to B flat. And then etc. In this age of CGI, artificial intelligence, and deepfakes, Sousa's trio and final strain represent 1893's greatest special effects. Wave-like runs in the clarinet section, representing the beach, of course, in the popular patrol march effect of simulating a marching band approaching and getting ever louder until it passes, then falls out of earshot. I hope you can join me in this fantastic ensemble on October 24th at the Scottish Rite Museum. As always, the ensemble sounds brilliant. Hope to see you there.